Hello, I'm Frieda Hughes. Before COVID-19, I was due to give a few readings this year, the first one being at the Oxford Literary Festival, and everything, of course, has been cancelled. So I thought I'd try and do a longer than 15-minute YouTube video, which is interesting because in 15 minutes I might screw up once or twice. In an hour or 50 minutes, I have every hope of screwing up quite a lot. I'll try not to, but I will fail, not if you see what I mean. I'm going to read from two of my recent collections, but I'm sort of cheating because this one, the most recent, is actually a very generous selection from four of my earlier collections. So Out of the Ashes. And from the second book, Alternative Values, I'll be reading a handful from there. This has 8 sections in it: love, life, death, and a few others. In the love poem section, you have poems that might be good for weddings, and in the death section, you have poems that might be good for funerals, or you have poems that might be good for people who would like to think that life goes on beyond the death of a loved one. There's quite a selection. Anyway, those are the two books that I'll be reading from. And I'm going to start with Out of the Ashes and a couple of poems from my very first collection, Wooraloo. Now, Wooraloo was a little hamlet I lived in Australia in the 1990s, which seems like a very long time ago right now. And it was on the edge of the bush. It was quiet. It was very isolated. Living there, I didn't get many visitors. And I loved it very much, but one can't necessarily stay living on the edge of the bush forever, although it was a thought. The first poem is called Bird, and it's about a frogmouth, which is an Australian bird that has a mouth so wide that when it opens its beak, it looks as though its head's about to split in half. That's what this is about. Flip top with brain at the beak back. Mouth so wide open, houses would disappear. Continents cringe, curl their toes and hang on to their oceans. More with a jaw as wide as whatever enters. Small mice, large cats, or middle-sized rats with twisted whiskers. Its call hallows the black that brings silence, and the body bears feathers in its quiet. Its little soul sleeps, so small in its twigs. If it yawns or belches, there is a city in there with its lights on. During the 90s, the 1990s, I also had a lot of friends who were going through pregnancies and having, for some reason, caesareans. Caesareans seemed to feature a lot at that time, and so my thought went into a poem, and this is it. Caesarean. That's the trouble with these babies now. They take one look at that hot, wet hole and hear the traffic and the screaming beyond, even only for a taxi, and they try to climb right back up again. A father adds up the cost already. He is showing pennies and cents to a dilated vagina and hoping the kid can count. With its feet on either side of its mother's gaping manhole, and with the nurses beckoning, the child is hanging on to the placenta, pretending to grow there. Until suddenly the door opens. Not the trap door with the head clamps, but the side door with the hip hinges, and it all begins. Moving on to my next collection, Stone Picker, I'm going to read the title poem, and the title poem is based on any individual, but in this case it's a woman, who blames you for everything wrong in their lives. It's a person who blames everybody else, no matter what, and holds grudges, makes a profession out of it almost, and sees no fault of their own. So in other words, they don't learn anything either, because if we own up to our faults, we are inclined to hopefully move on from there and not make them again. So here we have Stone Picker. She is scooped out and bow-like as if her string has been drawn tight. But really, she is plucking stones from the dirt for her shoulder bag. It is her dead albatross, her cross, her choice. In it lie her weapons. Each granite sphere or sea-worn flint has weight against your sin. You cannot win. She calls you close, but not to let you in, only for a better aim. She's got to throw those stones. When I read that poem it was up in Norfolk somewhere, and after the reading I was walking to my car in the dark and there were these really rapid footsteps after me, and I started to hurry and the footsteps started to hurry faster, and finally I was almost running, and this woman finally caught up with me near my car, and she grabs hold of my arm and she says, "I had no idea you knew my sister-in-law." So everybody has their own stone pickers. Now, when I was a child, probably 7 or 8, I was visiting a little girl who showed me the most wondrous toy. It was a bird in a gilt cage. This is a poem about coveting something that isn't yours. The Birdcage. It is bright and gold, ring-holed at the top for a chain. A little girl is caught in its bars as surely as the toy bird, each of them perch-bound, one looking out, the other peering in, but trapped by those green and blue feathers and the bead of a dead eye. Not given to her, she must watch another child carry the canary to a hot spot on the radiator for its trick. And there it is left in the rising air. The bird shudders as if life has just been forced back through its yellow beak and into its small mechanical breast. Its wings open, its tail spreads, and suddenly it is singing. I should have been yours. I should have been yours. It was the most amazing toy I've ever seen. Right, next we have, okay, this is a tough one. This is the thing about my readings. I will take you on a journey through my life in various parts, and some of it is quite difficult, some of it, I hope, has a sense of humour. My father, when he died in 1998, was lying in his coffin at the family home, so we could go and visit him. So I sat by his coffin, and this is a poem about that. Conversation with Death. Death has come to have a look at his work. Sitting by my father's coffin, fingers linked in his lap like any doctor, he is smiling. You took him too soon, I say. It wasn't easy, he tells me. Every time I found a way to get him, he slipped out of it. That first time I was sure the cells I chose would do it. I watered each blessed seed. I visited daily. My flowers flowered, but I found he could uproot them with almost a thought. Each day was stolen from me. Even when I had him by the heart, tried to stop it beating, held it fast with my 2 hands, it was as if he climbed inside his own crawl space and picked off my fingers, one by one. You could have left him longer, I protested. Death frowned. To take some poor soul car crashed by the roadside or with bullet holes and a leg blown off is easy. There is no grace in that. But to take a greatness who fights with all that accumulated excellence, derived from a full time, even had in a short time, is an art. I could have had him in his 30s. I wanted him then. I have wanted him all along. If I told you I nearly lifted him off a train when he was only 42 or 43, and a little arrhythmia was going to be my percussion's end to his ebb and flow of corpuscles, could you not see how lucky you are to have had him for longer? I let him ripen on his tree like a heavy fruit. But to wait until his stalk broke in his 80s or maybe even his 90s, to have him roll into my lap like a ripe fig, would have ruined me. To take him at the peak of his perfection, when he was at his escaping most cleverest, meant I really got to achieve something. Moving on to the next book in the collection, Waxworks. Waxworks is a collection where I sort of plundered the archives in actually Madame Tussauds. There are characters from Madame Tussauds, our history, from fairy stories, from the Bible, all kinds of people, and I've updated them. Sometimes a modern character, one of us, has been put into one of those old outfits, and sometimes they speak for themselves. Rasputin Rasputin is any con man. And I knew one once. I've known several, actually. However, see what you think of this. You'll probably have met your own. Rasputin. He's selling God. You can buy the book, $6 a Bible. He sells life insurance on the side and can do a deal on a car for the cash and a ride. His wife is pregnant again, each child by a stranger, he says to the girls who want to understand his vast kindness in taking on another man's burden. If they looked a little closer, they'd see his face on each of the three, bastards by rumour only, his wife undone and left when he found another one. But his eyes, like pointy spears darting out from their almond greens, are looking for anyone who won't ask questions and move him on. What he has seen are the voids that women carry, their wounds wanting to be stopped up and gagged. Come sin with me, he tells them, and my forgiveness will set you free. God is embedded bodily as if I have been marked out by the gift of his most powerful blessing and made immortal. My hands are magic. And his hands performed. They took houses, cars and checkbooks. The old and the infirm came to him, their powers of attorney flapping like winter cloaks, eager to be given to a man who promised warmth in return for their investment. When, one by one cast out as empty, the men and women stood up in only the emperor's new clothes, they discovered he had been poisoned once for fraud and lived, as if God acknowledged his apology. So this time, they shot him. Rumpelstiltskin rather speaks for himself. Rumpelstiltskin wants a child, crumpled in on his face, hunchbacked and trailing his ears. He knows there isn't a woman alive who would lie down for him. Once he spun gold from hay for a workman's daughter, 3 times, to marry her off to a king who coveted her fingers, all for the price of an infant. Just for a game to stop up her wail of protest when he came to collect. She must guess his name, he said, and he would forgive the debt. He limped off, laughing, to wait. But she caught him out. He was seen applauding himself as Rumpelstiltskin. It took him years to unpick his right foot from the earth into which his fury propelled it. Rumpelstiltskin wants a child. He is too old to adopt, even as a non-smoker working from home. He could teach it to spin gold from straw, but no one wants his skill anymore. He is searching hospital bins for anything with life left in. He can make a silk purse from a sow's ear, a clutch bag from a severed hand, or a descendant from a cut-out ovary. As a stepdaughter, I was reading this next poem and wondering if it was autobiographical, but unfortunately the realisation came to me right in the middle of reading it in front of an audience of about 400 at Smith College in America, and I just remember that hesitation as I thought, was this me? Anyway, Cinderella has been updated. Cinderella climbs from the dishwasher. She has picked the last scrap of her stepmother's linguine from the open pores of the metal drum. With her hands in the ashes of the grate in which hope smoulders, she is doubtful of rescue by her prince and a golden slipper. She decides to go it alone and leave home. It will free her from waiting at her stepmother's hearth for a man wielding a shoe and a scrotum, while her sisters toss her fish heads and bones. She has choices now, and if age should outweigh her womanhood before she finds a husband, she'll use a cell donor for the extra chromosomes or be cloned. Definitely very modern. Vlad the Impaler really did speak for himself. When I was writing the poem, it was a very weird sensation, strange sensation. It was as if somebody else was leaning over my shoulder, moving my hand. I mention this because it was one of the rare poems that was written once and never changed. It never had any drafts, it never had any corrections. It was as it hit the page. Vlad the Impaler. I love to see the little trees, their branches cut, their barbs like sharpened spears, be blunted by adorning heads. Apple-bobbing fleshy balls with eyes a-popping and ears to give a starling purchase where once were twigs. And see my arch of bones, a tangled thing of limbs as stripped and bare as crows can make, and leading off, my avenue of stakes rise tall above a man, each topped off by a face in which two puddles for a thirsty beak were irises till thirst was quenched and holes began. And here I roll your children's heads, orifices fit for fingers, jaws wired for silence, and play skittles with their arms and legs. Nobody said he was a nice man. Another difficult one coming up, and the difficult ones are always more personal. And actually, if I was standing on stage in front of you at this point, I would take a drink from a glass of water, which I have close at hand, so I don't have to kind of duck down and my head have my head vanish. You see, I'm stuttering already. Need the water. Right. Preparing the Ground is a deeply personal, very autobiographical poem. Can there something be very autobiographical, or is it just autobiographical? My grandmother came to visit my parents, my mother Sylvia Plath and my father Ted Hughes, when I was about 2.5, nearly, not long after 3, it would have been 2.5. And she tried to persuade my mother to take us away. And at this point, my father was having an affair. These are things, I suppose, one would like not to talk about, but since in my case it's all out there, everybody else talks about it, I just write poems about it and maybe give you a little bit of, sort of chat about the poem. But I have a memory of this, and the memory was very vivid, and it had an extraordinary effect on the rest of my life and me as a person and who I am. So preparing the ground as a poem about the moment that became a foundation stone really for my adult self. Like the portent of doom, my grandmother flies in from the north. The magnetic pole of her presence appears to repel my father. He goes away for a couple of days, and my grandmother splits open her face at her smile, as if taking each side of her mouth in her 2 hands and pulling it apart, to allow her doppelganger to scramble from the lip noose of opened granny bag and step into the hallway. I watch the flare of her nostrils, the caverns in which her wind blasts, as she leads me to the garden to watch over my 6-month-old brother. Eyeing the boy, bottom anchored by his nappy, I reckoned it would be 2 days before he crawled as far as the undergrowth, into which he might disappear. Convinced of his immobility, I follow my grandmother's scent back into the dark burrow of the central hallway. She is raging. Her storm has been my mother's marriage long in the brewing. "You must leave him," she cries. "This new woman has no warmth for her son-in-law. He'll be seeing her, you know. The wastrel, the faithless scoundrel." Making a cake, my mother scrapes the mixture into a baking tin, but tears overcome her, and the kitchen's too small to weep in, so she sits at the larder table, unable to contain her wretchedness. "You must come home with me," says my grandmother, elated, as if she has won something. If my father only knew how she became someone he'd not met before when he wasn't looking, he'd never have walked out that door. He'd carry us away to safety and not look back at the unloose witch and her coven of one, her spite and her bile gut-rotting her into a stomach stapling. My mother holds her face in the bucket of her hands. She doesn't notice my grandmother's smile as she picks up the forgotten sponge and places it exactly in the centre of the oven. Seeing me brotherless, my grandmother brings him in from the garden. I have already considered placing him near in the hope he can hear, so that when he speaks at last, he'll bear witness to all that has passed. But now I see he is dumber than it will take to ever remember. My mother beds him down in the cot in my bedroom corner, her own chipping away at her as if she were an egg, to be broken and beaten and turned into something else. My grandmother stills her beak from pitting holes in the ground of my mother's skull, into which she pours salt when she sees me watching, not missing a thing, eavesdropping. She picks me up and carries me to her bed in the room my father writes in. The sheets are as cold as glass on my bare legs. I'm hugging my frozen knees in my nightdress, wishing to be saved from the magic carpet of my grandmother's prayer. "Would you like to come live with me?" she says, and I ball up all my questions into my incapable mouth. My tongue is helpless but to ask, "Can Daddy come?" Meaning everything. "We'll see," she replies, her face as hard as pyrite. I know as she leaves the room that I am losing my father. I can hear my grandmother's voice like a machine grinding at my mother some more as I creep past my bedroom door. Downstairs, I stand at the black Bakelite telephone. Someone must tell my father before his children are taken. I gaze at the pages of notebooks all covered in scrawl and realise that I cannot read. Even if I knew where to find him, when I place my finger in the dial and pull, it barely moves. My finger buckles useless at the knuckle. My grandmother's engine is the background hum on the drum of my ear. My father is too far away to hear his mother-in-law's tongue flaying. There are poems that lead on from that. In fact, there are a couple in Alternative Values, but I find that quite harrowing to read. I don't know what it's like to listen to. But moving on to a slightly different subject, a problem. What is a problem? A problem always has a solution. If it doesn't have a solution, I think of it as an immovable obstacle. And so I wrote a poem about that. The problem. Your consideration gives it shape. Where there was nothing before, you have reached into the void and pulled it up, out of the black and into the sunlight, in order to see it more clearly. Your comparison of it to the other thoughts that occupy your head gives it size. It is enormous, a nagging lump that overshadows all the easier tasks and undertakings with its huge importance. Being large gives it weight, and because it is yours, expanding to preoccupy your every deliberation, you find your shoulders buckling beneath the bulk of it, your head so clogged your neck might snap. Now your problem has shape, size, and weight. You can properly identify it. You decide it is a mountain. Unconquerable by joy or will or effort, you give up and lie down in its shadow to wait for the carrion eaters to come. As you lie there, in the same dark from which the problem first emerged, it occurs to you that its very nature defines it as owning a solution. If there is none, then it is not a problem. It is an insurmountable obstacle. The insurmountable obstacle towers over you. In fact, it appears to have grown. You beg it to go away, but being insurmountable, it doesn't move. Instead, it grows roots and harbours small mammals beneath its rocky outcrops. The insurmountable obstacle has fed on your veneration of its significance and become productive. If ignored, it will develop a climate. You ask yourself what to do, faced with the permanence of this obstruction. Uselessly falling down before it has left its evolution unaffected. Better to face it, size it up, take its measure and visualize its edges. Then, imagining yourself at a point beyond it, walk around it. Have you ever had a fight and you think you can't understand why the other person isn't reasonable, and you wonder if the fight is worth it? You try to reason with the other person, but no, remember, they're unreasonable. And so it goes on. But you're proud. Should you walk away? I wrote this poem with all that in mind. To the victor, an empty chalice. See their gritted teeth and glassy stare fixated on whatever it is they want to get hold of, glittering or shining or promising supreme satisfaction. It is going to cost them much more in time or effort or money than they will ever win. It could be a man or a woman or their own way or the conclusion of a well thought out plan. Their perpetual state is confrontation, their lawyers on speed dial to secure the secrecy of their efforts. The corpse of their smile reflects all the little deaths behind their ocular pebbles that record their success. Whatever it is, hand it over. Look, They want it so badly, their whole life is the fight. It defines them. Without it, they're pointless. Let them win and fall over, or continue to suffer their malice. Let them have it tonight. Just give in. Be free from conflict and allow them the prize. To the victor, an empty chalice. Life is too short. Too short for fighting. Okay, another personal one. This is called To the Daughter I Never Had. Now, I haven't had children, and it was a very personal choice, and I was very young when I made it. I have revisited that choice several times, and I started when I was 9.5, and I looked at the world, and I was very concerned at the world, because we appeared to be breeding quite a lot, and I couldn't work out where we were going to put everybody. It's all very well people saying we have wide open spaces. You know, if you're living in Australia, you might be able to build on all the wide open spaces you like, but you're not going to have water. There are an enormous number of people on the planet now. When I was 9.5 years old, there were a lot less of us. But I made a decision that I would not have children, and that would be my contribution to the planet's welfare and for its well-being. I didn't want to bring children into a world either that was going to be harsh or cruel or difficult. So that personal choice carried on until it was impossible to change it, and I've never regretted it. I do, however, adopt animals, rather a lot of animals and owls. But I think sometimes, you know, what if? So, The Daughter I Never Had is a poem about what if. You have been perfect from birth. You cried only when I was awake to feed you. You grew rapidly. One morning you were a squirming, teething thing. The next you were 3, out of nappies, hand on my knee, wanting a story at bedtime. You were all mine. No one else contributed a gene to the colouring of your eyes, your hair, your skin. No man left DNA for you to trace the relationship, or for me to regret the association and his predictable absence. You have loved me unconditionally and without the inevitable battle of wills when reaching puberty. You fulfill your potential. Your intellectual promise is realised daily. You waste nothing of yourself, even in the little things. You have identified your special skills and the man you will marry, so I can dress in pink silk with an obscenely large hat and drink to your day, which is made mine by proxy as I give you away. So that's the last poem I'm reading from Out of the Ashes, and I'm just now going to take you on a little journey through alternative values. And I start in the love section. And I like this because if I'm reading this for a proper audience, like real people sitting on chairs, something we're probably not going to see for quite a while, and my partner is there, I always imagine him hearing this and heading for the back door as quickly as possible. This is called Wedding Poem for You. This poem contains the first time I ever saw you, standing, smiling, sitting, or just talking, looking into the eyes of other people as you spoke, or staring into the distance as if you were searching for someone, or walking with purpose as if you were on your way to meet them. This poem remembers that I studied your ears for unsightly hair, and the profile of your nose for an unattractive bulbous end or excessive asymmetry. These were physical cautions that accompanied my observation of the size of your belly. If I could not get past that, there was no point in presenting myself. Also, your height and shoulder breadth. Would I have to defend you in a bar fight, or could you take care of yourself? The smell of your feet and the brightness of your teeth would come later if you wanted me. And if you didn't believe that I was the most stunning woman you'd ever seen, the Lolita of your dreams in every respect, then I'd have simply thought you ignorant. Whereas now we're marrying, I know you're a man of superior intellect. I do like that one. But then my poems, I'm supposed to like them all, aren't I? This is important, this poem. And in fact, it now occurs to me, here we are all locked down with COVID-19, and I wonder how many people are wishing they'd had the one last kiss of the title before being sealed up behind closed doors, as we're supposed to be. One last kiss. You'd do anything for one last kiss, you say, but why? You had it, only you didn't know then that it was not to be followed by others. If that man, woman or child were to be brought back from that other place of death or desertion or separation by some non-negotiable distance, and you had that one last kiss, what then? Pain of separation and departure all over again? Pain repeating pain, no joy for either? Do you really mean that in that one last kiss you would pour all your love and tenderness in order to assure that other person of the love you feel? How would that lessen loss? If that one last kiss is still the thing you'd long to give someone, then give it now before they're gone. Give it daily. Never be caught out for never passing on the one last kiss you'd give, just because you didn't know that's what it was. I'm just moving poems around here because I look at a poem and I think, ooh, I better read that one, or no, don't read that one. And actually, because I normally have them all in order, which they are, but I'm making a couple of last minute changes because next I want to read the title poem of Alternative Values. This also has a picture. It's on a picture of owl's eyes, and as several of the poems are. And these pictures are painted to reflect how I feel about the content of each poem in an abstract sort of way. Now, the title poem Alternative Values it contains owls, not bugs, just owls. I have 15 of them that people have given me when they could no longer keep them, and they're part of my daily life. I'm waffling now. You see, this is the trouble, because I've got the camera and I don't know who I'm talking to, and so I just go off on a tangent, and I can't possibly edit this out because if I haven't said it before, I ain't no good at that. It's not something I don't have some fabulous system where I can just edit my films. It's just me and my Android phone and Alternative Values. The owl does not always look ahead with eyes on the horizontal. Sometimes it will tilt its visual axis by 90 degrees, as if checking the position of an object against its own foothold on reality. Just as what we think we see is not always the truth, and we should wait for an alternative view to be delivered by word of mouth, the passage of time, or by shifting our attitude like the owl, that knows it is all a matter of perspective. I think that's one of the problems being shut up in the house for too long. Perspective becomes rather difficult as things get a little short-sighted. I've written the next poem, which is from the Dissection, because I have a friend whose partner died and they were so distraught. It was almost like watching them throw themselves over the cliff edge after their dead loved one. And for me, life is so very much about living. I've had enough death in my family. I think it's enough to be getting on with, and I think that every moment is precious. I think that it is, even if how can I say this in a succinct way? Because I haven't practiced, you see. I should have been practicing this. A succinct way. I believe that it doesn't matter how badly you get through life or each day, providing the way in which you get through life or each day is the best that you can do. Doesn't matter if you're stumbling and crawling. If it's the best you can do, you are giving it your best. No one could ask more of you. Because I really do believe life is for living. This is not a rehearsal. So I wrote this poem with my friend very much in mind, and it's called For the Living Left Behind. No one dead who loved you would wish your future years dismembered against the rocks of their departure. They would not sentence you to the guilt of betrayal for any moment they weren't uppermost in your mind, nor would they wish you whittled down like a stick to pick the stony teeth in the open mouth of abject misery, daily until you are nothing left. No one dead who loved you would want your still breathing carcass to be lost in the wilderness that spans the two worlds of the living and the dead, where you are neither dead nor living. They would not applaud your misery, but would weep to watch their loss, made pointless by the waste of you. The dead become a part of us, our skin, our bone, our thinking. Their existence is continuous in us and the best we do in everything as we move on from the moment of their passing. Step back from the graveside where nothing flowers. Do not undo the best they did for you. I don't know how I can read that in any more heartfelt a way, but it is certainly heartfelt. An interest in politics can begin at any age. I sometimes think just by being human we're political creatures. Playing gods. It's about three little boys, and it's a reflection on their older influences, shall we say. Three boys are playing with stones in the dirt. They decide to call them gods because gods are omnipotent. Gods can do anything. My God, says one, rolling his large stone left and right, is the source of life. He sees everything and understands. He forgives. He teaches. He demonstrates kindness because he can. My God, says another, does the same, but better. My God can smash your God to pieces. My God won't take shit from anyone. My God kicks ass. He lifts his heavy stone and drops it to demonstrate its great weight. The third boy watches thoughtfully, nursing his rock in the crook of his knee. My God will punish you, says the first boy, for threatening him. He's not that forgiving. My God, says the second boy, will make your women worthless. He'll cover them up lest they be seen. They'll even collude, believing they are preserving their modesty, when in fact they're vanishing. My God will show you how your mother is cast out as a beggar when your father dies and can no longer house her. She won't even be allowed to drive to lessen her chance to escape. Your sister will be meat in a man's market and will have to marry to eat. The third boy stands to leave. What about your God? Cry the other two. My God, he says, tucking his rock beneath his arm, would make your mother's barren. Children for you. An examination of the work of others. Being a critic. is really about a critic. It's a bit of a squeaky book, this one. You have to be careful reading this. This poem's called Dissection. She's a clever woman, that one. She knit her words like poison, charm her wit, sharp like hypodermic. Her armour on, she spiked her pen and wrote out her verdict. Her face, poor brilliant, was hid, except through that quick thought, as she did unpick her specimen from where it writhed and squirmed upon its paper stage. Spatchcocked its efforts, all laid out upon the page, its lungs, its tongue, its liver and its heart still pumping. She found it was more interesting to separate its parts than to step back and observe the sum of its performance, the purpose of its art. This is the trouble. Sometimes I think people are just so ready to criticise and tear apart. It's easy to break something. It's so damn easy. You just shove it off the edge of a table, or you know, if you want to break a person, you just say terrible things. That sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me is a load of rubbish. And but to make something, to create something, to put something positive is an art. And what a gift. So there we have a handful of alternative values. And I'm just going to finish on one more from alternative values, but there is one more from this love poem from Motorbike. Yes, I could read you that, couldn't I? Because I so miss my motorbikes. Oh, right now I'm really suffering. I really miss my motorbikes. In fact, why don't I just read it for you? I'm going to read you Love Poem from Motorbike. This was actually published in the Times once in a previous incarnation. It's very hard to write a love poem and not be kind of queasy about it. So I don't know what you'll make of this, but I really do love my motorbikes. I'd always hoped I'd overcome the craving and forget about 2 wheels and an engine. During years in offices wearing pencil skirts too tight to allow the necessary overseat leg swing. I'd watch Motor Guzzies and Nortons go by, straighten the crease in my stockings and step in heels from a car. In an effort to release myself from the sensation that I was somehow other than the woman I appeared to be, and that the skin I wore was ill-fitting, I stopped looking at motorbikes, or motorbike magazines, or men on those machines. I told myself that motorbikes were not made to carry dogs and cats, or cart worldly goods from bedsits to flats. So I mothballed my plans for 2 wheels of any kind. No Kawasaki's or Harley's for me, just Fords and Subarus, the sort of vehicles that serviced life but dulled the mind. And life passed by, although the wish for a motorbike continued like an inexplicable itch. Obscured by flesh, it tattooed my bones with an engine number of my own, beneath which black paint and chrome, pistons as heartbeat, ignition key like a compass, always the means to get home. I can't wait until this COVID-19 curfew is finished and I can go for some nice motorbike rides around Wales, obeying the speed limit at all times, of course. The last one I'm going to read from Alternative Values is called Another Wedding Poem for You. I've sat and worked at these words until they were tortured into this complacency. They have littered the desk like tatty knotted threads, snipped from the back of this poem, as if it were a piece of embroidery which, when turned over, would display some peacock vision of colours. But the actual design is giving me some trouble. So this poem is less peacock and more peahen. But then again, all I wanted to do was describe how deep my feelings run for you, without actually stitching those syllables into the fabric of this poem, because they are hackneyed, often abused, and sometimes even lie. And here they are, noticeable for their field greens and in-your-face reds, the colours of grass and lovers' roses, common only because they are many. But so are lovers, each believing what they feel is the only time in history those feelings have been real, just like we do. Maybe a poem for a wedding. And finally, going back to Out of the Ashes, this poem is, well, I can find it, a poem that when I was doing a television programme, it was a long time ago, and it was on More 4, and I forget what it was called. I forget what it was called now, but I remember Stanley Johnson presiding over it, and one of the other guests was the then editor of Nuts magazine. I don't know if it's the same one now, but he greeted me with enthusiasm, and he said, Frieda, I'm so glad to meet you. I love your poetry. I love your poems. And I was flattered and flabbergasted and wanted to know how he knew my poetry. Oh, he said, I've seen it on the internet. So it was actually a copyright infringement because I didn't put it there. But the poem was, of course, appropriately enough, called Breasts. So I'm going to finish on that. Scarred beneath their bags of heavy silicon, they were mountains, shored up and sharpened, a handful of the mind's mud at a time. Those breasts weren't for a limp sweater or a bra size more than 2 saucers. Those breasts had purpose. Men's eyes would unpage magazines for a sight of them. Melissa was no longer required to speak. Her breasts could talk. They had a language, and everyone understood. When at last she made the photo shoot, she gently placed her breasts of shiny plastic flesh upon the table for the cameraman and left. Melissa, you see, was a glamour model who'd had a change of heart. Actually, she'd had a change of breasts and gone several sizes smaller. And it was based on a documentary I saw about women in the glamour industry who changed their minds. Anyway, if I had been standing in front of you in an auditorium, I would now be saying, and any questions? And the great thing is, I can say that, any questions, but I won't be taking any. One is, even if there was time to monitor questions, then I would probably be off walking a dog, or maybe things will be better then and I'll be riding a motorbike. But in the meantime, under the effects of COVID-19, I hope everybody is staying well and healthy and exercising at home and looking after themselves and each other. And this is my reading in lieu of all the others that have been cancelled. Warts and all. Thank you very much.